More problems to solve. Transmissions to the centrally located transmitter with its 1,000-foot tower were achieved by microwave link. A dish on the tower next to the studio sent a radio beam to a similar dish on another tower at the transmitter. But microwave towers were costly, so ones just tall enough to get the signal from studio to transmitter and to clear the trees were eventually chosen. Of course, this meant that as the trees grew, the towers had to be constantly increased in height. Another problem was water collection in the microwave dishes. The dish would fill and the signal would be extinguished. This was more easily solved by the addition of a small drain hole. Dad writes about the problem with tower height as follows. There was one complication. About 15 miles from the studio, a heavily wooded prominence interposed itself directly between the towers. The engineers were in extremis, but they rose to the challenge. They computed that towers 250 feet in height would just graze the crest of the hill. There was one other tiny flaw in the plan. Someone had just purchased two second-hand 200-foot towers and was gleefully savoring his parsimony. But despite strident ululations to the contrary, the towers were erected, and the engineers spent 2 unfruitful weeks in a vain attempt to make contact with the transmitter end of the link. Finally, someone relented and purchased an extra 50 feet of tower, and all concerned burst into exultant hosannas. The link worked well. The composite structure just skimmed the top of the offending obstruction. At least they did until the summer, when the trees on the hill grew another 2 feet. End of Ragsdale's remarks. The station was built right next to a wooded area, and this meant that various woodland creatures would enter the studio. According to my dad, such creatures very often did something funny on the studio floors, but we won't dwell on that. The big barn doors of the studio were often left wide open to get a little air circulation in the very hot and humid Tallahassee summers. This meant that bugs of all persuasions would enter the studio. According to my dad, the bugs would sometimes enter the performers as well. The control room area of the station was rather limited, as I remember. The actual control room looked through glass to the main production area, where you could see stage lights hanging down from the rafters. I was usually not allowed in the control room, though I found it a fascinating sight with all its switches, meters, and monitors. However, behind the control room was another room where what was called the Ike chain was set up. Ike was an abbreviation for iconoscope and referred to the TV camera tube into which a movie projector shined through a lens system. I understand that the first Ike chain was not built sturdily enough, and that the movies had a jittery quality, as the entire apparatus vibrated up and down. That was later fixed, though I doubt it improved that much on the B, C, D through F movies that they showed. In fact, some of the movies were military training films, and this sometimes caused problems. My dad tells that movies were purchased in batches with the idea that they were rotated on loan among many stations. However, Dad also told of what were called shorts, or public service announcements, PSAs. These were used to fill time and were grabbed from a box without being previewed. This changed, as my dad tells it, when a short military training movie on how to protect from a certain embarrassing disease went out over the air. Surprisingly, there was apparently only one comment from the public, a little old lady, who indicated that the film was, quotes, highly interesting. Dad was one of the engineers who built the station's studios and the transmitter. He even at least once went up the 1,000-foot tower to change the light that warned aircraft away from a deadly encounter. He was certainly the one picked for special training when videotapes started becoming available around 1957. It was then that he made the obligatory trek to Redwood City, California, where videotape recording was invented. I still remember that videotape recorder first installed at WFSU-TV. It was tall and imposing and used very wide tape. Dad was the resident expert on the system. Yet, just like At the radio station, Bill Ragsdale was not destined to remain on the technical side of the business. It was on the opening day of station operations when the owner gave Ragsdale some momentous news. They had forgotten to select a weatherman, and Dad was dubbed as their only one right on the spot. In addition, the owner had just been to New York City where he had seen a sign outside a movie theater. The sign was about air conditioning, a novelty most places. It was inviting people to come into the movie since it was cool inside. The caricature on the sign was a walrus who looked like my dad and was sporting a bushy mustache just like Dad also did. The owner bought a derby while up north, and upon telling my dad he was a weatherman, handed the hat to him. Dad was to wear the derby and would be called Willie the Weatherman. It was a moniker he would exercise proudly for almost 20 years, and effectively even longer. In fact, the next segment tells a little of what happened to him while he was WCTV's weatherman, though it was a field for which he had never really been trained. Yet such a fact hardly ever stopped my dad.